you everybody for coming to this session, the final one before the last wine reception. Yes, we have another wine reception. I'm delighted to be able to let you all see that we're doing this on a Google Hangout, which is being recorded, and we'll make the video available afterwards. In the Hangout, we've got with us Brandon Muramatsu, who's an educational technology consultant, senior educational technology consultant in the Office of Educational Innovation and Technology at MIT. And we've also got Justin Ball, who's the Chief Technology Officer from Open Tapestry, and David Wiley, who's on the screen there, who you'll recognise, the co-founder of Lumen Learning, and has done lots and lots of work in the area of openness. So we're delighted to be able to have our friends join us from the States, and it's probably still quite early in the morning for them. So we're all flagging because this is the second day of the conference and it's the last session of the afternoon before the plenary. Anyway, I'm going to hand you over now to Brandon, and then Joel's going to do a demo of the system that they're going to be talking about, and I think David's going to do something at the end. We also have a hashtag for questions, so OER14 OEA, which does look like a town in New Zealand when it's written down. But I'll hand over to Brandon now, and he can tell you more, and we'll monitor questions, and then when we get to the end of the session, we can make sure that we pass those on to the guys, and I'm sure they'll do their best to answer them. So off you go.
So thank you, Suzanne. Thank you all for being there at OER 14. We're sorry that we couldn't be there. We're here to talk about open embedded assessments. I heard Suzanne mention that if you want to ask us questions, send out the hashtag OER14OEA. We thought we'd start off by saying this is where we are right now. We're all very happy to be here. We're also very sad to not be there. David and Justin are both in Utah, and then I'm in Massachusetts right now. What we thought we'd do today is talk a little bit about the motivation, the background for the project, do a quick demo, and then talk a little bit about the idea of shared open assessment banks. And at the end, we hope to have time for some questions and answers and find out from you how you think you might use open embedded assessment, and talk a little bit about the notion of sharing assessments and embedding them widely. A little bit about the background. This is sort of where things stand today. There's lots has been done in OER content. A little bit and more is starting to be done in open education practice, but we have this wall between the content and the assessments. So much of what we've seen, certainly up through the last year or so, has been separate PDF files, static assessments, or things that are contained in separate quiz and test systems. So if you're going through trying to learn a topic or an item, a concept, you will find that you're going through materials, and then you have to take a switch. You have to stop and then move over into taking an assessment. If you're using sites like OpenCourseWare or MIT OpenCourseWare, you'll find that you have to stop, look at a PDF file, and go back and forth between PDF files. Or you find that you have to break the learning experience and go off into a completely separate quiz and test system. So one of the things we've been talking about is how might we do for assessments and items the same things that we've done for content. Be able to share them, share assessments widely, be able to embed them anywhere, so not require you to have to go to a separate system or to break the flow of learning within content. We definitely want to be able to share them, and then also be able to evaluate, record, and track responses. The scale, being able to have more and more people start to use assessments helps us with their validity, and also may help us get to the evidence of impact. We're going to focus on formative assessments for helping students check their own understanding or their mastery of the concepts. By focusing on formative assessments, we get to sort of sidestep some of the really hairy questions about identity and authenticating your identity and making sure that we know who you say you are, and that using these things for final grades or summative assessments can be problematic in situations like that. So we sort of started with the low-hanging fruit, starting with something that we would be able to build off of and work up from, and then slowly starting to add complexity into the system. And it's very much an iterative process. I think Justin will cover a little bit of that in the demo. And so, real quick, talk a little bit about what's being done today with embedding assessments within OER materials. We see Saylor.org. It's a site supported by the Saylor Foundation. David, I think, is actually on their board of advisors. They've collected OER materials from across a wide range of providers and formed them into courses and sort of organized them as courses. And if we go to one of the courses, in this case, a pre-calculus course, we'll see that they've got a list of assessments listed, and they're drawn from various sources. The first two at the top are from MyOpenMath, and so if you went there, you could enter in, you could log in and you could take an assessment live. But a lot of their assessments are what's shown in the highlighted circle. They're PDF files, in this case from the Washington State Board, and then we see it's a PDF with a question. Write an equation for a circle with diameter 20 centered at the point -2, 4. And so you have to sort of stop and do all of this stuff by hand. It's a break in the learning and the flow of what you're doing. And so we're trying to come up with some ideas which we might be able to address that a little bit better. MIT OpenCourseWare, they've got a sub-project called OCW Scholar where they focus on taking some of the traditionally published OpenCourseWare materials, focusing them specifically for independent learners. If we go and look at one of their courses, generating electromagnetic waves, energy, and scattering, they've got a check yourself question. If you click on it, you get a simple multiple choice question that's sort of embedded in the content. So that's sort of a step forward, but it's all saved within the site MIT OpenCourseWare, and they're not collecting statistics on how students or learners or individuals are answering those questions. And then going the correct direction, here we see what's more typical of certainly the MIT OpenCourseWare sites is they've got a set of questions stored off as a PDF, very similar to what we saw in the Saylor example. And lastly, I think we're starting to see a big change with the advent of MOOCs and the notion of sort of infinite assessment or infinite formative assessment. You can take between 1, 10, and an infinite number of tries to attempt to solve problems. This is an example from MIT's 6002X course. It has a series of content modules, in this case videos, talking about particular topics, and then you get to an inline quiz, and you can enter in a algebraic expression and have that evaluated, and that becomes part of your score, your activities for this section. So we're starting to see a change that's driven by being able to have lots of assessments embedded in content, having the assessments in line with the content, being able to keep the entire learning experience together. And now I'm going to switch over and have Justin do a demo, so hopefully you're ready there, Justin. The site is openassessments.org, and go ahead and take it away, Justin.
All right, so hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for the opportunity to kind of show this off. I'm assuming that the screen will lock to the correct view here in Google Hangouts. So if anybody wants to play with the software, it is live at openassessments.com. We have an example assessment up on the homepage, so if you just click on example assessment, it'll land you over here on this comparing fractions as an example. It's pretty simple to use. The idea is that you can just select one of these. A student would check their answer, and it just so happens that I got it correct. If you get it incorrect, it gives you that feedback, and then you can kind of navigate here through the quiz. Down here at the bottom of the page is the part that's the most interesting, is kind of the thing that Open Assessments adds above your typical assessment tool, which is the ability to grab this code and then embed that anywhere you'd like. So to give you an example, with Open Tapestry, we created this course for Western Governors University. And at the bottom, we were able to embed one of these quizzes. So you can see here the quiz is in the context of this specific course, along with this video that the student's supposed to watch. And it also has a list of tasks that they're supposed to complete. So one of the things they can do is complete the quiz. If the student finishes this quiz, it actually sends feedback to the Open Tapestry framework or to any framework that decides to embed an assessment, and it'll say the student has completed it, and it'll automatically mark the task as completed or do whatever it is that the system that contains the assessment wishes to do with it. So you can see there it is in context. Now to give you a quick example of how this works, I have a quiz right here. You can see the Chrome is for the Open Assessment website is gone. It's just the quiz. And all that you have to do is specify a source URL of any QTI file that is publicly available on the internet. Now in this case, we're loading the QTI file directly from Open Assessments, but it doesn't have to be Open Assessments. You can load it from your own servers. And as long as it's QTI, I think 1.2 or something, it'll work. And if you ever have a QTI file for which it does not work, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to make that work. There are a couple of other things that you can pass in here as well. They're not part of the default setup that you can just copy and paste from right here, but they are available if you wish to use them in your specific integration. One of those is a user ID. So I can pass user_ID equals any value you like, and that will be the identifier that is used to record the statistics for that given student. We don't need to know who they are. We'll just provide that back to you so that you can correlate the statistics with the student inside of your system. And then there's a second one available that allows you to pass in the endpoint where the statistics are collected. So that way, if you don't want the statistics to be collected in Open Assessments, it can call back into a system that you've implemented that specifies the same API as Open Assessments. And then the net result of that would be that you get statistics that look something like this. Let's give it a second here to load. There we go. So this will tell you, here are the number of times this specific assessment has been displayed, here are the number of unique users, so on and so forth, and then here are the item results. So we can record this for everyone who's ever done it, and we can also record it for specific individual. In addition to that, we're also adding a few other metrics, one of which is to determine the amount of time that passes between when the question is displayed and when the student answers the question, so that we kind of get a feel for how confident the student is in their answer. So that's just a really quick overview. Hopefully that gives you a taste for what Open Assessments can do, and I think I'm passing it off to Wiley now.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to talk about the other side of this coin. For a long time, as has been said, for a long time it's been the case that you couldn't really put an assessment anywhere you wanted it. You had to do your content, hit next, and then go to the assessment there. And it wasn't possible in a reusable or open way to embed assessments directly in line like, say, Carnegie Mellon Open Learning Initiative has been doing for 10 years now. So now that the software infrastructure is being built out to do this, the only thing that's left is questions and content to run inside this embeddable question player, this YouTube for assessment. And so we've recently received a grant from the Hewlett Foundation to create openly licensed test item banks for 20 high enrolling courses, undergraduate level high enrolling courses. So these would be things like biology for non-majors, intro to sociology, intro to psychology, 20 of those kinds of courses worth of content. All of the items for this formative assessment bank will be in multiple choice. They will all be licensed CC0, so we don't have to fight over attribution requirements and figure out how, in the middle of a 10-item quiz, how we show attribution to a student correctly without distracting them from the learning that they're trying to do. And in addition to distributing all those items as QTI files, we will get them all loaded up into the Open Embedded Assessment tool, and you'll be able to just grab those and throw them right into any of these very popular high-enrolling undergraduate courses. That's all that I've got to say on that matter. Maybe now we can open it up for questions.
So, Suzanne, I guess, are there any questions from within the room? I haven't seen any on Twitter. You'll have to unmute yourself, Suzanne.
We're just going to get somebody to come over. It's just so you can hear. Okay.
I really like the idea of this and the concept of this because people struggle all the time with identifying questions, assessment, and so on. But the questions are very sort of specific to a particular curriculum. So I'm a bit worried that those questions aren't already being thought through as the curriculum is being developed. Shouldn't they already be there as part of that learning anyway?
Did you get that?
Yes, so I guess the question was, there's a concern that the questions, certainly the ones that we were showing, are very specific to a very specific curriculum.
Yeah.
I think that that's true, but I think it's important to understand that they're a demo, and so those are sample questions. The idea is that you can put in any question for any course or curriculum that you have, and can, using this player, embed that question in any other piece of web accessible content. So the point is, there are a couple points. One is to be able to reuse a set of questions that might already exist. We do have within our roadmap discussions talking about how do you edit and modify quizzes and individual items so you can take them and use them in whatever context you want to use them. But also the point is to be able to let anyone embed any of their own questions in any of their own content. And I don't know, David, do you have any other responses that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that as we're developing the test blueprints for these test item banks, that we're reviewing, popular OER, we're reviewing popular textbooks, we're looking at the topics and the learning outcomes that are typically taught across multiple instances of these courses, and we're writing assessment items that align with those outcomes that are commonly taught across different courses. So, for example, in every psychology course, there's a unit on behavior and the brain, and there's a bit that talks about neurons and axons and dendrites as part of that section of the psychology of the brain. That's included in almost every single undergraduate psychology course textbook or syllabus that we've seen, and so we'll write some items that go along with that. Of course, the good news about the items is, as Brandon was saying, that they'll all be CC0 licensed. So if you don't like them exactly the way you find them, you can tweak them. But we have been taking care, as we've pulled the test blueprints together, which is the roadmap for the test development, which says how many items of which type on which topic ought to be created, that we are creating items that are quite representative of what's typically taught.
Okay. There is one question that's come in on Twitter, which you might want to have a look at. Anybody else in the room while the guys are thinking about that one? Any more questions from anywhere in the room? I've got one. What kind of other assessment types are you looking at?
So the first ones that have been implemented are multiple choice, single answer. Justin, I know you were looking at all of the various different flavors of multiple choice. I'm not sure which ones you might have implemented. We've also talked about short answer questions. we have on the roadmap the ability to take numerical answers, and so it's slowly starting to build up the various different types of questions that all quiz and test systems support, starting with the ones that we thought might be most useful earliest. Justin, if you want to add anything more to that.
I think you've got the basic list there. I'm hoping to get it to the point where we support any of the quiz types that QTI supports, plus some other custom types. So we did a project with the EDC, the Education Development Council at Maine, where the students had to answer a question related to fractions, but they also have to draw their answer on the screen. Mm-hmm. And then we capture that as part of the student's activity. So we use some of the new HTML5 capabilities to make that possible, and I'm hoping to bring some of that technology into open assessments as well to have some kind of richer assessment experiences, and then open it up to the community. I mean, it is open source, so we're hoping to kind of get some broader involvement. So if somebody has a specific question type that they'd like to implement, they could do so, and we'd be happy to accept a request for that.
Cool. Pat asked about attribution distracting from exams, but from learning. I'm not really sure whether you get what he's on about, but maybe we could ask Pat if he could.
Yes, I guess if Pat wants to elaborate. Otherwise, I was going to toss that to you, David.
No, it's fine. I mean, that is something that different people are taking different approaches to dealing with, and I don't think there's been any really concrete guidance. I guess I can unmute my video here. I don't think there's been any concrete guidance from Creative Commons on the best way to do this. But I think his point with regard to attribution and learning is just that if you've remixed a lot of material together into an instructional experience, and every second paragraph, every image, there's a big pullout that has an attribution list with the name of the person and the name of the work and a link to the license, and your learning flow is interrupted by all those attribution statements. That can create a lot of extraneous cognitive load, that can pull you off topic, it can get you clicking on things that now have you wandering around the web instead of doing your learning. So I think it seems like the emerging best practice is to aggregate those attribution statements and put them at least at the very bottom of the page, like, as if they were footnotes, if not moving all of the attributions for a single course to a single page that linking to with a smaller link at the bottom of the page. But I do think, I think it was Brian Lamb who said, when you see the Creative Commons logo at the bottom of a page, what it's essentially saying is, I am not a jerk. People who actually openly license their material want you to reuse it, and they're looking for you to do useful things with it. And particularly in this community, we all want to support learning. That's what we want primarily. We all do secondarily also want to get attributed. So finding ways to make that attribution still available and still sufficiently prominent, but not having it get in the way and interrupt the flow of learning is something that we all care about. I've got I'll throw in the Twitter, I've got a link for some attribution guidelines that we've been developing for ourselves for how to build up attribution statements that go at the bottom of a page of remixed content as opposed to inlining all those attributions, just as an example that people can look at if they're interested.
That'd be really useful, David. Thank you.
And I think, David, as part of the version 4 guidelines and presentation that Jane has been talking about for the new Creative Commons versions, they've been talking about doing things towards the end of either a presentation or a course as one of their suggested guidelines. And looking at the Twitter stream, that's what Pat was asking, is can we just start putting it at the end or putting it sort of out of the direct line of learning.
Got it.
There are a couple other questions from the Twitter feed. Do we think it would be a good idea to get students to generate questions? Absolutely. I think that's a great way to help them with their own learning, to have them design and questions and answers, and then reflect on what the answers might mean and how the learning supports that. Then there's another question, will the responses feed into student learning analytics or institutional student tracking systems? That's somewhere between a question between David and Justin. we've got the statistics being generated for each question, and I believe, Justin, you've set up an endpoint where you can send it off through an API to another system. But perhaps if one of the two of you guys will talk about that.
So, yes, we have set it up. Well, there's still some things to work out, as always. But we can set it up to send the statistics to a different endpoint, or you can go ahead and just collect them in OEA. I'm not sure, are you looking for more information than that? Or?
So I guess the question is, ultimately, will we be able to send them to a different location, like an institutional system?
Yeah. And that was I didn't give you the URL parameter, but there's a parameter you can put in the URL to say, send it over here instead. I guess with the one caveat that whoever wants to receive those statistics will have to implement the code on their side to get those stats. So I'm not sure if that's going to be easier or if it would be easier just to download them from OEA. So it just depends on how technical the team who is implementing OEA is.
Okay. There's one more question on the Twitter feed from Margaret, who asks if you've got any experience of seeing agility in course content updates based on assessment, what works, etc.
Agility is a stretch, I guess I would say. One of the things that we've been doing at Lumen this last term is doing analytics-based course improvement reports. So let me string all that together and explain what I mean. So basically, we've been looking at the behavioral data and the assessment data generated as students have taken courses at the colleges that we work with, analyzing those data to identify which parts of the course are doing the worst job of supporting student learning. And so that's the data part, using the data to find the places where students aren't learning what at the level that they ought to. Then going in manually and doing instructional design reviews of those portions of the course to try to figure out why the learning isn't being supported. And then writing up 2-page reports to send back to faculty to say, before you teach this course again, you might consider making these kinds of changes. Here's some alternative OER that you might want to grab and use, or you might want to clarify the instructions on this assessment. So we are engaging in these course improvements, but I would not use the word agile to describe them, because it's a day-long process to do that for one of these courses. The analytics piece of it is fairly quick, but then it's the manual instructional design review, trying to figure out what is broken in those parts of the courses, and then finding alternative OER or trying to make reasonable recommendations that a normal faculty member who's not a trained educational technologist can implement to try to overcome what isn't working there. So yes, on using assessment data to improve courses. No, it is not agile in any sense of the word.
Okay, thank you. I think we've come to the end of the session now. So I'd like to ask people in the room if they would clap loudly so our speakers can hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Suzanne, I think we promised to show off some Legos.
You did promise to show off some Lego, yes, please. So yeah. Cameras are ready, folks.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Lots of appreciative noises in the room. And Joel's got a poo.
There you go.
Yeah, lots of jealousy in the room for the Star Wars and A.A. Milne.
And David, anything from you?
Unfortunately, my office is in my basement, and nobody warned me I was supposed to bring Legos down here today. All mine are upstairs.
Lego too.
Oh, sure.
You're supposed to have Legos in your office all the time, David.
Okay, well, thanks again, and amazing that the technology held up in a conference. Usually it works just before the session and then fails when the session is actually on. So thank you again, and I hope you have a really nice day.